How to mix your beats fast. It's your guy Brahma, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to mix your beats fast with these 6 steps. Before we get into the 6 steps, I just want to let you know that you definitely want to pay attention all the way through the video, because I'm going to be dropping some gems, and I'm a break mixing down in such an elementary way that even a 5-year-old will understand it. Okay, so if you've been one of those music producers that mixing has been a hard next step for you, like you find yourself frustrated and trying to look at all these YouTube videos and they become too technical because they're trying to tell you that you need to do this and add this and it's not making sense, this video is going to make sense to you, okay? Let's get right into it. So step number 1, we're going to keep it simple. Gain staging. You hear me talk about this in my other videos. Gain staging is important. It was something that I didn't understand at first. Even when I met engineers back in the day that came from recording schools, conservatories, they didn't understand this because they didn't teach me this. And if they did understand it, they didn't give the game to me. I had to learn this later on. So gain staging, making sure that you bring your instruments down to give you enough headroom for the plugins to actually work. Case in point, if I make a beat, 9 times out of 10, by the time I'm finished with that beat and I look at the master, the stereo bus, right? The master stereo bus, it's going to be like +5 because I got everything turned loud, especially the drums and the bass. Them shits is beating and kicking, right? In most cases, producers are going to just put a soft clipper, or they're going to put a limiter on there to basically bring it down. But that basically kind of just squashes it. That's still not letting the EQs and compressors and everything and all the other plugins that you have on the individual tracks, the channel strips, aren't working to the maximum potential because the headroom is already maxed out. So they're kind of like, what am I here for? You know, so you want to gain stage, bring everything down to, I'd say start off with like a -10. Just put a gain plug-in on your track channel on all of them and bring it down to like a -10. Start there. If you drop too much out to where there's too much headroom, you could always bring that back up, or you could use some of the plugins that I'm going to talk about in the later steps to boost, to make up that gain. Step number 2, clean up EQ. Okay, so EQ, most of the time when we use EQ, the first thing we try to do is boost the frequencies. And most of the time it's going to be the bass, but you are setting yourself up for failure when you start boosting too quickly. Don't boost first, cut first. You're doing yourself a major disservice when you try to start boosting first, because then you're already eating up the headroom that you just gave yourself. No, when you cut, you're giving yourself even more headroom to work with, and you're giving the instruments enough space to kind of sit in their own pocket. Case in point. So if I'm working on the bass, right, and that's usually the first thing to do is work on the bass, and that means to kick in the bass line. When I'm working with these frequencies, I'm going to cut certain ones out of the kick and boost them in the bass, so that way they're not clashing with each other. You definitely want to start cutting and clearing up the frequencies so that you make room for the other frequencies to exist. So in the high end, you're going to cut out some of the bass so that the bass has its own room in the beat. If you have like a pad sound that has a lot of bass in it, it's going to be eating up some of that headroom in the bass end. So the bass line and the kick are going to be clashing with that particular instrument. Even if you did cut the frequencies out the kick and the bass and to get them sitting well with each other, you still don't want all your other instruments that have basses in them to be competing with those. Step number 3, compress only the instruments that need compression. So when I started mixing, I thought everything should be compressed. I mean, it was to the point where all kind of shit in my beat was squashed. The whole beat was just squashed, right? Because that's what compression does. It brings the lowest level sound and the highest level sound and puts them together so that they're at an even level. And compression could be used to add fatness and give more oomph and volume, right? In a lot of my mixes after I gain stage, I'll use the compression to boost the makeup gain. I use the makeup gain to make up the gain that I took out in the initial cleanup. And when you do that, it gives the sound a fatter vibe. Whether, rather than just using channel strip volume fader to turn it up. If you use the makeup gain, you're turning it up in the compressor, and the compressor has already got it sounding fat. So now you're boosting the volume of the fatness, right? And you're boosting the fatness of the sound, right? That's a little gem. Case in point. So, and when I say only the instruments that need it, everything doesn't need to be compressed. Certain things you want to have dynamic range. So like a pad, I may not compress because I want it to kind of flow and have a stereo field and be dynamic. I want it to sound real and raw. So I may not compress that sound, but the kick and the bass, I'm going to compress, and I'm going to put a side chain compressor, side chain compression on those sounds on the kick and the bass, so that when one hits, the other one ducks, right? So that's the kind of compression I'm going to use. And also, like I said, to boost up certain things. So if I want the snare or the clap to sound a little fatter, I'm going to add a compressor to it. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to tweak it to where it sounds fat, and it gives you that umph, and so the snare's smacking you right in the face. That's what I'm going to do. I may or may not do it to a hi-hat. A hi-hat doesn't necessarily always need it if I want it to sound dynamic and raw, right? If I need to have more control, that's what the compression is good for, to control the sound. If the sound needs to be more controlled, you add a compressor to it. Just think of it like that. But don't think that everything needs compressors. It doesn't. You want to be able to have certain sounds that express freely without being limited or squashed down or leveled out. Like I said, some of the flowy sounds. But drums, a lot of times the drums, I may do them individually, or when I do that drum bus track, I'm going to add compressors there, and that's going to give more fatness to the overall the drum sounds. It's really up to you. And like I said, man, only use compression when it's necessary on instruments that really need it. Don't use it on everything just because you can. Number 4, boosting with EQ. Okay, so here's where it gets kind of like, be careful, because you don't want to boost everything. It's just like with the compressor, you could squash everything. When you add too much boosting on the EQ, you could make everything start to sound muddy and dirty and start to clash. You only want to boost frequencies that need it. Case in point, when we talked about cutting earlier, I talked about cutting certain frequencies out the kick and certain frequencies out the bass, and then boosting where I cut. So that may sound confusing, but let's say I cut 60 hertz out of the bass because I need to boost that on the kick, right? Because the kick is focused in 660 hertz and it's knocking right there. I'm going to boost that band right there, and then I'm going to cut it out the bass so that I open up that space for the kick to do that, right? So then I might cut out 200 or 100 hertz out the kick because I want to boost it where that bass is. The bass is knocking at 200, right? And these are just, I'm not giving you these certain frequencies to do. I'm just using this as an example. So the bass, I might boost in that 100, 200 range to give it more body where I took it out the kick at, right? Now there's a marriage. Now they're kind of glued together in that way, right? And with the side chain compressor on there, you can't lose. So now that I've done everything else, I can start boosting. So boosting in that area with the kick and the bass. And then I might boost something in the snare. Let's say I cut out, I don't know. Let's say I'm just throwing some random hertz out there, some random frequencies out there. Let's say I cut out 250, 300 in the snare because it sounded boxy right there or something, right? Then I might go up higher in the let's say 2K 2500 range, right? Because I might want to get that snap, and I might boost there just like 1 dB just to get that snap right in that snare. But like I said, you want to be careful where you're doing that at, because certain frequencies, when by the time the vocals get in there, let's say the beat gets to an engineer and you boosted everything in, let's say you boosted your hi-hat in that range and the snare up too high. Now the vocals don't have a place to sit because everything is the mid-range, the high mid-range is already kind of taken up. You want to make sure that you leave space for the vocals too when you're boosting these instruments. Keep that in mind. Like I said, boosting frequencies, you don't usually have to do it too much. If you use the right sounds that already come ready, they're already cured, they're already treated, then you don't have to worry about doing that too much. But as I said before though, you want to do it to give the instruments character in where they need it at. So don't do it on every instrument. Just boost where it's necessary and where it's needed. Number 5, balancing with volume and panning. So here's where this comes in, right? Now we're starting to talk about bringing things in the forefront and some things in the background, right? And then putting things to the left or the right, just to give your music a more stereo field. When you're doing your volume, you're already kind of doing that when you start making a beat anyway, right? You're going to have your snare right here. You might have your kick right here, your bass right here. However you do it is based on your ear. When you start doing that, you're kind of pre-mixing in a way, right? You're mixing as you go when it comes to leveling. However, when you start your mixing phase, usually you want to turn everything up and center everything, right? Just so that you get a new scope, because you may see the beat different from when you first started making the track. Now, at this point, you have a better perspective of how everything should go. So you start leveling, right? Put your kick where you need it to go. I usually start with the basics, so the kick and the snare, because these are going to be at the forefront anyway. So I level them first and level everything else based on where those are at. In the bass line too. So the kick, bass, and the snare are like the three-headed beast you want to attack when it comes to leveling first. Once you get that, everything else can sit on top of that. Those are your foundation. And then start panning. As I said, when you start working on your drums, which is what I mix first anyway, outside of the bass line, I'm going to pan them just like I would. I'm going to pan them from the perspective of the listener. So the listeners looking at a band play on the stage when they're listening to your music. This is the perception. They're watching the drummer. The drummer has his hi-hats right here, his toms right here, and the percussion right here, and the kick and snare are right in center. Crash is up here, cymbal up here, however, right? So I'm going to level based on that and pan based on that. And then same thing with the bass, right? The bass I always put right up the middle. The guitarist, if I have a guitar or something, I might put him on the right. When you're watching the show, you see the guitarist on the other side of the stage rocking out. And then the keyboard player may be to the left, right? So I'm going to put the keyboard right there. Sometimes I put the keyboard up the middle. It just depends on how I feel. But all these things are up to your perception, but have fun with it and give yourself a visual when you're mixing this way, because you're creating depth of field. You're creating a landscape for your listeners to sit in while they're listening to the music. So have fun with that. You might have a synth lead go from one ear to the next, right? And that could be looked at as like someone with a keytar on stage, and they're playing a synth lead and they're walking from one side of the stage to the next. It's all about how you choose to see it in your mind. But have fun with this part, because you're creating the dimension and field for your listeners to sit in. And number 6, the last one, adding more dimension and depth with delays and reverbs. So I always do this. Let me tell you, before I started always doing this, I wasn't always doing it, but now I always do it. So I used to put a different reverb, or every track that needed reverb, I used to put it on the individual tracks, right? So like if I wanted a R verb on this snare, and then I wanted a true verb on this pad. What I learned is if you use a bunch of different reverbs, you're kind of muddying up the mix a little bit and you're losing control. it can work if you do it for like a guitar, because if you're looking at it like in the sense of live instrumentation, this guitar guy that I'm recording might have a whole different set of reverbs already printed to track when we're going in and recording him, right? So that's okay. Certain times it's okay. But now how I look at it is that there's every instrument that needs reverb is going through the same reverb. So I create a bus track with the reverb, and I send all the instruments that need reverb to that bus, right? It makes it easier too, because you're not eating up as much CPU, right? With all the different reverb plugins, you have one reverb that you're sending everything to. You get a cleaner mix and everything sounds uniform, like it was recorded in the same room. So that's a trick that I learned. Same thing with the delay. Unless I want something to do a different kind of delay, the maximum I would put is like 2 different delays in a track. That's how I like to do it, man. To keep everything uniform and keep everything easy, I use one reverb and one delay, and I just send things to it, and I give different volumes. So as far as the send, so if I want the pad to have more reverb, I might put it at like -10. Right. Whereas if I just want the snare to kind of have to be kissed by it, I might put it at like -20, because I don't want you to really hear it. I want you to feel it. Those are the 6 steps to getting your beats mixed fast. I hope this video really helped you and gave you clarity on the mixing process. If you dig it, man, leave a comment so I know you're feeling it. Let me know what you got from it. Also, if you want to add some things to it, feel free to do so in the comments. That's what the comments are for. It's commentary, right? And I want your commentary on this video. Make sure you like it too, and that helps push this into the algorithm so more producers could get some of this game, this wisdom. I'm giving 26 years of wisdom. I usually say over 25 because it's, I've been producing since 99. It's easier to say that. But if we're being specific, 26 years, I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying that to say that I've stayed true to music this long, and I feel that a large part of my purpose is to give back everything I learned in this game to you. If you're watching this video is for you. Okay, make sure you subscribe for more material like this, because this is just the beginning. Also, make sure you watch this video right here, man, where I show you how to arrange your beats. You could take a loop into a full production in less than 15 minutes following these steps in this video. Okay, check it out right here.